You are listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. Sustainable World Radio brings you in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about positive solutions to environmental challenges. Solutions that adhere to the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, fair share. Are you interested in learning more about permaculture projects around the globe? How to plant a food forest? Restorative design or ethnobotany? Then stay tuned for Sustainable World Radio. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier. My guest today is Katrina Blair, wild foods advocate, gardener, chef, and community activist. Katrina is the founder of Turtle Lake Refuge, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to celebrate the connections between personal health and wild lands. Katrina is also the author of The Wild Wisdom of Weeds, 13 Essential Plants for Human Survival. Welcome to Sustainable World, Katrina Blair.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm grateful to be here.
Katrina, I finished your book and loved it, and many of the plants that you write about, these 13 plants essential for our survival, they kind of read like a who's who of many gardeners' least wanted plants, and some of them we'll talk more in depth about them during the interview, but are dandelion, dock, knotweed, mallow, lamb's quarters, thistle. Why are you convinced that these 13 plants are essential for our survival?
Well, they are special in the fact that they grow really close to human populations. So wherever we live as a human, anywhere on the planet, we're going to disturb the soil. And these plants, that's their niche, is compact and disturbed soil. So no matter where we go, we're going to find these plants, and often in abundance. And so there's this incredible relationship of them being really close to us wherever we live and being incredibly beneficial medicinally and edibly.
One thing I thought was really interesting is the idea that we have a symbiotic relationship with these plants, and that we have a relationship with our domesticated crops and the plants that we grow for food. And then these plants we have a symbiotic relationship with as well, but it's in a different way. Like you said, it's more we disturb the area and they come in.
Right, and they're, in addition to supporting our health, with food and medicine right out our back door for free, they also regenerate the earth. So when we compact the soil, their job, nature, sends these plants right in as a first line of action as pioneer plants to help regenerate and loosen up and aerate the soils and bring back fertility and topsoil.
So they're working.
Yeah, they're very valuable. And for the pollinators, of course. A lot of the natural forage for the pollinators are disappearing as humans develop more and more cities and roads, and so the weeds that are growing in the cracks and the edges of gardens and walkways, that becomes so valuable to the pollination insect population.
Mm-hmm. In the book, you write that the plants create a bridge between us and the wilder state of being human. Can you tell our listeners about that?
Yeah, so it's exciting that these plants, because they're absolutely wild, completely resilient and filled with a wild vitality that have evolved over time with nature, through thousands and thousands of years. And here we are in our civilized world, but they're like breaking through the sidewalk cracks and having this wildness accessible to our human civilization, especially when we ingest them or utilize them or appreciate them. We get access to this incredible wild strain of, it's thinking, but also embodying. So when we ingest a wild plant, we become that plant because we are what we eat. So when we ingest, let's just say, a dandelion growing through a city crack, this wild dandelion is brilliant, this being. It's learned how to survive through changing climates and inhospitable soils, and yet it's still thriving. And it's lived its whole life outside and knows what's happening underground. So when we ingest it, all of a sudden we become a part dandelion, and that wisdom, that brilliance of how to survive starts to become the matrix of who we are, even on a cellular level, as our body breaks down these proteins and nutrients and puts them into us. So there's this incredible bridge that they're offering us to regain our intuition on how to survive here on planet Earth.
And that fits in with what you've said about the wild wisdom of these plants offer us a path to align us with environmental patterns and forces of nature.
Exactly, because we are in this very interesting time in the 21st century, and the climate is, we're all noticing some erratic behavior or changing or warmings, and these plants are experts at handling change. And so we have a lot to learn from them.
In the book, I loved how you said it. You wrote about your wild and weedy past. How did you first become aware of these plants as allies and begin to advocate for them?
Let's see, I guess I have to start from before I was born, which is just with my parents. My dad is a mountaineer and a geologist and a climber, so he got me out into the woods really early on. And my mom is a nutritionist, but she had rheumatoid arthritis before I was born. Like since she was 17, she went through 12 years of Western medical traditions and all the drugs and surgeries. And then when I was 2 years old, she decided to do a juice fast. And after 4 days of juicing, the pain disappeared that she'd been living with chronically. And so that was a huge epiphany for her of kind of like, what have I been missing? So she started my brother and I on this path of doing green juices twice a day and becoming the master of our own health. And, so when I was 2, this just all became normal. And I think that had a big impact. But then when I was 11, I was floating on this lake, on this little air mattress, and I was with my cousins and brother, and they all went back to have lunch. And then I kept paddling across the lake and went eventually out of sight and around the corner, and these plants on the shore were kind of attracting me over. And I crawled through the muck and sat down amongst all these plants and got completely euphoric, like the biggest high I'd ever experienced. And the plants said, "You're home and you're going to live your life with us." And
Wow.
that feeling that I had at that time is still really present with me, and I wanted to go deeper into it, so I ended up right after high school camping out for a whole summer by myself with the intention of eating all wild edible foods. And I did bring a little bit of food with me, some buckwheat, sunflower seeds, and flax seeds that I would soak overnight for breakfast. But then the rest of the time I didn't bring any other food up there. And I just learned so much that summer with books and with sometimes I wouldn't know a plant and I would bike back into town and bring it to my mom, and we would muscle test and see, like, is this plant strong, good for me? And if it was, I'd eat it, and if it wasn't, I wouldn't. And then I would look it up and research it, and always found out that our testing was accurate. And then in college, I did get a degree in biology, but I went to a school where we just took one class at a time. So I was able to get a great advisor who let me go to the woods for a month, and then I would study the plants and come back and write a paper, and I did several of those.
Your parents greatly influenced you, and then your direct experience with the plants. And when you were 11, after that experience, did you just naturally start noticing the plants more, or did you always have that connection?
I think I always had that connection, but definitely after 11, that feeling of like, whoa, this is where I belong, or this is home. That was a potent. It was more like more feeling of at peace and at home than I'd ever experienced. And so I was just so attracted to continue to feel that. And when I would go to the woods, that's when it would show up. And so I still today, every day, take a long solo walkabout where I don't bring food and walk, and it's that same feeling of just,
I'm
you're home. Yes.
Many people look at these plants as the, quote, enemy, end quote. They're weeds, they're persistent, they're resilient, they tend not to go away even when you spray them with herbicide. For people with no foraging experience, and maybe people that have looked at these plants as the plant to pull out, what are some good plants to get started with?
Yeah, these plants are our friends, and it's really fun to start building relationships with them because they are so easy to find and pretty easy to identify, and then often just right in your pathways as you're moving through the daily life. And so I would say if you're just beginning, choose the ones you already know. So it might be Dandelion or maybe Purslane or Mallow. And those three, well, Purslane is very delicious. It's very succulent and slightly, lemony, and so it's really pleasing to the palate, and you can play with that one. And then Mallow, which common mallow or cheesewheel, it's also very common to find, pretty easy to find, especially in gardens and And it has a real mild flavor. So there's in the book there's a lot of recipes to play with for making food and medicine and skincare. But I just encourage people to go out and play with these plants because it brings such joy and connection to our place, in addition to an incredible amount of wealth of health and minerals and food supply.
Well, I was really surprised with mallow because that was one of the plants in my old garden that was just everywhere, like surrounded. And so I looked it up and I learned it was good for laryngitis, but I just didn't really do anything with it. And I was so impressed with some of the recipes for mallow in your book. For the mallow water and how good it is for skincare. And so I really gained an appreciation of this plant.
Oh, great. Yeah, mallow. I am just in awe of mallow. It's just so vast.
Can you tell our listeners the 13 plants, list them by name, and then maybe we can go in depth a bit about a few of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's dandelion and curly dock and purslane and plantain and mallow and all the wild mustards and all the grasses. And there's chickweed and knotweed and clover. And there's thistle and...
That may be it. Amaranth?
Amaranth and lamb's quarter. That's it. Yeah, good job. Yeah.
Thistle surprised me. I will go to the store and buy milk thistle in a little tincture bottle. And then I thought, Jill, what's the difference? There I am buying it from the store, and I look at it as a weed. So it's interesting to see that disconnect.
There we go. Exactly. That we can think that something's valuable if it's in a pill form or been commercialized on some level. But when we go direct to the earth, sometimes we overlook the absolute richness that we have available to us.
And it sounds like most of them do grow worldwide. So listeners listening worldwide will have access to these plants.
Yeah, it's fun how every state in the nation has these weeds, as well as every country in the world.
So wherever you go, there they are.
Yeah.
So if you could pick just a couple of them and talk a bit about their virtues and how people can use them.
Great. Well, we can start with thistle, because thistle is one of those plants that sometimes we think of as the bane of society. It's pokey, and sometimes people think it's taking over, and it's certainly on the noxious weed list in every state. I completely take out the word eradicate, because it's an odd concept that we think that something shouldn't belong here on Earth, when really we're all equal and everything is sacred. Everything has a place, and it's fun to step back from thinking we need to interfere so much, but actually step back and drop into a deep listening place of, wow, teach me, show me, be humble to the earth and everything that's growing and living currently right now, versus thinking we know best. So thistle teaches us on so many levels. I love it because it's also like a permaculture plant, in the sense of how do we take a problem, consider a problem, and turn it into the very solution. And with thistle, it's ironic because here we are as a nation spraying herbicides on this one plant, and the herbicides are very toxic to our liver. And the remedy is that very plant where thistle, the root of thistle rebuilds and regenerates liver cells. And so if someone were to get sick from spraying, the medicine they would need would be what they were spraying.
Wow. Oh, that is amazing.
But thistle is fun on a lot of levels because you can juice. The whole thing is edible. So what I like to do is juice the greens. And when I say juice, it's just gathering maybe 5 of the leaves, and they're a little pokey. So if you go from the back rib, there's no spine, there's no pokies on there. So you can do it bare hands or you can use gloves. But maybe 5 to 8 leaves of the thistle plant. And there's so many different varieties of thistle, whether it's musk thistle or Canadian thistle, then they're all good. You might taste them just a little bit to check to see if you like the flavor. But what I like to do with the musk thistle is take about 5 or 8 leaves, put it in my blender, and I fill the blender full of water, maybe 3/4 full, and then I might add an apple or lemon or a little honey, depending. Blend it up, and then I strain out the prickles, and you've got this incredibly delicious green lemonade or green juice.
Which is so good for your liver.
It's so good for your liver, and it also is very alkalinizing to the body. And so if we think about 90+% of all human illnesses tend to stem from being acidic on the internal condition. internal chemistry, whether it's stress or toxins or overprocessed foods or whatever. And when we bring the alkaline foods in, such as the greens, our body automatically starts to balance and regenerate itself and heal. And whether it's a common cold to cancer, the solution's the same. We bring ourselves back into balance. And it's so special that the earth is just providing the exact things we need to bring us back into those balance points. So thistle is one of the most alkaline greens, and then it's fabulous. And then the stalk of thistle is better than celery. You just peel off the leaves and you eat the stalk, especially when it's right before it flowers. Then it's still juicy. Once it flowers, it turns a little bit pissy. The stalk is really delicious. And then once it goes to flower, the flowers are really tasty. And you can pick the little purple flowers or, take a clump off of it. And there's a white fluff down below. But if you put that whole thing in your mouth, the purple and the white, you chew it up, and the sweetness comes from the purple nectar, and then the chewing gum comes from the white fluff. And you've got this great chewing gum for the day.
That is fabulous. Who
and
knew?
Then even the seeds of thistle, once it goes to seed and turns into a huge puff ball, kind of like a dandelion, you can gather the whole thing in your hand and separate the little wing shaft part from the seeds. And then those seeds are really valuable, and they make a great nut milk, or a seed milk. I'll add thistle seeds or dandelion seeds to sunflower seeds or almonds and blend it up to make a milk. And even the root is very edible. So, the whole plant is exciting to think about. You have this whole pantry in this one plant.
And do the roots of these plants, and thistle in particular, do they contain a lot of minerals from the mining action that they have of pulling nutrients from deep within the earth?
If we think about the majority of foods that we purchase from the store, especially if they're conventionally grown, so they only have, if they're annuals, which most of the foods we consume are, they only have 3 to 6 months to get established and get nutrients from the soil. And then if they're commercially grown, then, it's putting 3 minerals on them, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, where wild foods have these deep perennial roots or biannual roots that reach down and pull up minerals that we don't have access to. And so by eating wild foods, we're getting the whole rainbow trace spectrum, trace minerals that is essential for our integrity of healing and building our bones and maintaining.
When I think of thistle, I just think of the little spiny ouchy things. When you make the juice, you leave those on and then strain it out, I think you said.
Right. I blend it in a blender. Any old cheap blender will work. And then just a kitchen strainer, a simple kitchen strainer. And there's been times when I've just blended up and drank it, and actually the thorns have all been broken down. But just, as a precaution, you can strain it too.
New appreciation, and I always loved thistle, but now I can actually eat it, which is great.
Yeah.
What's another plant that you would like to share with our listeners?
Let's see. I would like to share the mustards. So all the wild mustards with their petals of 4 are spicy and sweet enough to make you want more. Their flowers come in yellow, pink, purple, and white, and get your creative juices flowing into the night.
I love it.
So the fun thing about mustard is the entire family is edible, and it's pretty easy to start identifying the mustard family because they have 4 flower petals, even though they can come in any different color, and they also have these little pods, and the pods can be long and skinny or round. They can be heart-shaped, and then, of course, it tastes spicy like wasabi or mustard. So if you see a 4-petal flower and it slightly looks weedy, you can go and take a little taste. I think you could taste any of them and see, is this a mustard? And right away, your tongue will tell you whether it's not a mustard. And then it's fun because once you identify that it's a mustard, the whole plant, again, is edible, and you can gather the little seeds to make mustard sauce. And what we did, we just served 100 people at the Colorado Permaculture Convergence this 8-course wild food meal. It was really fun. And one of the courses was these mustard pods that we harvested and then we pickled. We make homemade apple cider vinegar, and we added a little garlic and dill and then pickled these mustard pods and served that as one of the courses.
Oh, my God. I had no idea that you could eat the pod of mustard.
Yeah. And it stimulates circulation and creativity, so it's a great thing to include in our diet especially when we want to finish a project.
Oh my, I need some right now. No.
Right?
I need about 10 pounds.
Yeah, exactly.
100 pounds. And what about, if you wouldn't mind talking a bit about clover, because when I think about clover, I, again, buy the tincture or buy the dried herb from the store and then make teas. But how would you go about harvesting that, and what is clover good for?
Great. Yeah, clover's a fun one because there's so many different varieties. So there's alfalfa, and there's big red clover, and there's like a little white Dutch clover that grows in the grass. And then there's this yellow flowered black medic that also is low growing and grows in the grass. And they're all, okay, well, all the three-leaf clovers with roots so deep pulls up minerals from 100 feet. When you eat that clover flower and leaf, it builds your bones and strengthens your teeth. So all the clovers, no matter what variety, are one of the best mineral accumulating plants. And so with that is a good thing, and it can be too potent, and your tongue will tell you. So there's certain clovers that I'll taste and it'll be like, oh, this is delicious. I could even put it in a salad. And with that, I would use it in those kind of ways. Salad, I might put a little bit in my smoothie or juice. But then there's other clovers that I'll take a bite. The first bite might be okay, but if I take a second bite, I might experience like, whoa, that's too much. Whether it's a little bit of a burning sensation or a potency that doesn't feel like my body wants it anymore. So it's really smart to take it super slow and use your tongue and trust your intuition and really introduce yourself to each plant each day when you're about to harvest, because it's all different.
With the clover, are you talking about the flowers?
So the
flowers,
flowers, I actually love almost all the flowers of clover, and they rarely get too potent. So I can eat clover flowers all day.
Mm-hmm.
But the leaves, when they get older, that can be too potent. And when they're too potent to just eat, then I like to just harvest them and dry them and use them for tea. And so that's a great way to still benefit.
Cool. I know these little plants that they're underfoot a lot. Like we're walking on them. And the power of these plants is our nature's medicine chest.
Yes, exactly.
And in the book, you talk a lot about how some of these, or many of these, I think, or most, have a higher nutritional value than the plants that we might buy at the store or grow. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, and it is really quite true. Like there's a lot of studies that have show like, oh, let's just compare the calcium from spinach to dandelion. And, dandelion has more vitamin C or calcium, both actually, than milk or than spinach or some of the lettuces by far. So there's calculable nutrient levels that have been measured. But then if you go even deeper than that, if you go to the wild seed, that's where the potency is also. A lot of the garden varieties that we grow, they're still wonderful, but they've been hybridized over time or gotten a little bit bigger or easier to harvest or shorter lifespan. But we've been playing with these seeds, and then we plant them in a certain place, and we're kind of involved in a way which can be good, and it also ultimately decreases the potency of the plant. And when we go to the wild strains of seeds, and they're choosing to grow wherever the wind takes them, and they're opportunists, and they're harmonizing with the seasons and all the other organisms and microclimate and the ecosystem, they're just superior nutritional value on a lot of levels. You can, measure the actual nutrients, but there's also these other dimensions that might be harder to measure. But I know that I can experience it. Like I think differently. My consciousness is different. My focus is different when I'm eating wild foods. And it basically translates into a joy. Like there's just this natural high that comes when we ingest wild foods close by our home. And I think it's the relationship we have with them and going out and gathering them. There's just so much nutrition in the whole process. Then we eventually eat them.
And you write about the wild integrity of the plants. And that kind of, to me, was so powerful to think about that. It's like these resilient plants that are doing it themselves. And then the plants that we grow, which we love too, like broccoli, it's more of we baby them. And I could see how they don't have to fend for themselves quite as much.
Right. And then when we eat them, it's great. It might be tender and juicy and a little bit sweet or mild. But as far as what does that plant do to us? Well, it makes us tender, sweet, and mild, which is fine. However, when we're needing to survive in a different climate, or if we want to be a little bit more resilient, or we want to be a little bit more able to sustain and be sustainable in our present day, it's the wild plants that have so much to teach us.
Especially with climate change and how so many things are at a rapid pace changing right now and transitioning. I could see how these plants would be great allies at this time.
Right. Yeah.
You write also about how, so not only do they have higher nutritional value, we can use them for food and medicine, first aid, fiber, dyes. I mean, this is all in your book. But you also write about using them as supplements, which we've talked a bit about the minerals. They're great for that. And one thing I didn't really think about, which we've skirted on a bit in the interview, is emotional help too, and how they can help with overcoming addiction, antidepressants. Can you talk a bit about the emotional benefits of ingesting these plants or using them, being around them?
Yeah. Yeah. So with the wild plants, it's interesting. I think part of it is, there's so many levels we can address, but they're huge in shifting our mindset and our emotional health towards a greater stability and connectedness and feeling like we belong. I think when we go out and we eat right from the earth, we become the earth, and we know we belong. We know it from inside out. And even if we've experienced hardship, there's a deeper level of connectivity that starts to happen. Like, we're part of a huge family. We're just one of all of our family members, and the family members include the trees and the plants and the earth and the rocks and the wind, and sometimes we forget and we get isolated and start to feel like we're alone, or the hardships that have come unto us are overpowering. But as soon as we reach out and embrace the wisdom and the nutrients and the relationships with these plants, we start to remember who we really are and really our purpose, that we're here as caretakers of the earth, and we have so much to give.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful.
Yeah, so with overcoming addictions, and it could be as simple as caffeine or chocolate, or
sugar.
It could be your sugar, right, or alcohol. But one thing is, those are acidic. Those addictions, they tend to bring us more into acidity, which make us want it more too, because we're feeling deprived or lack of, so we might go to these quick energy sources again. And when we bring in mallow, for example, mallow is a fabulous antidote for coffee or for too much caffeine, where caffeine can make us jittery and a little bit hyper and slightly stressed or edgy. Even though it may give us energy, it comes with a cost of an edge. And the mallow is very mellow and soothing and holding and comforting and energizing also, but in a sustained way. So let's say you had your morning caffeine drink, it might be wise to go outside and get some wild mallow and make a mallow juice for your next beverage. And that's going to help even it out and sustain your energy, and in a grounded way.
And what about for depression and when you're feeling emotionally upset, or do any of the plants help with that?
Yeah, all the plants help with that, and particularly the flowers of the plants. So if you can go out and find a dandelion flower and start to eat some of the petals, the yellow petals, they taste like honey, a little bit like pollen and honey. You don't have to eat the whole thing, but you can. The whole thing is edible. But even just taking a pinch and chewing it up, that starts to change your mentality immediately. Because the flower is the most joyous expression of giving. Like, look at me, I am so amazing and beautiful, and all the bees, you want me. And we forget, when we get depressed, we start to forget how important and beautiful and amazing we are. And sometimes just by eating these wild flowers starts to remind us from the inside out, by becoming us.
Yes, instead of closing in, that slumped feeling, that closed in, the flower is just so open and... Yeah. Oh, that's great. And one other thing, too, that I wanted to touch on was the omega-3 content of some of these plants, which does help with mental health. What plants are high in those?
So Purslane gets the Gold Ribbon Award. And that Purslane has more omega-3 fatty acids than even fish. And so we don't have ocean everywhere near us necessarily, or there might be not sustainable approaches to gathering fish anymore. So having Purslane available is such an asset.
Do you have to eat like a barrel full of
No, you
No?
really don't. And that's the fun thing about these wild plants is that a little goes a long way because they're so potent. The seeds and the nature of, because it's not this perfect soil necessarily, even if it is perfect soil, the seed still has this vitality and vibrancy that it creates a potency. And so when we eat it, a little bit might be all we need. And that's how much do we eat really depends on each person and where their body is at that day. And so I always really remind people that they're very smart and intuitive, and if their body wants it, they'll enjoy, they'll try a little bit. If you like it, okay, have a little bit more. If you don't like it, then stop, but then try it again the next day because it'll start to change your chemistry, and you may actually start to crave it later.
And that gets us into the harvesting of these plants. And I loved how you had a taste test, and there's a safe way to do this and a respectful way. If you could touch on that a bit.
Yeah, so there are some real serious poisonous plants out there that you don't want to taste, such as poison hemlock. So in your area, you might get a plant book and just be aware of which plants are to avoid. But really, poison hemlock is one of the more common ones that you just don't want to taste, and that looks like parsley. So anything that looks like parsley when you're first starting out, don't taste that. But beyond that, most plants will tell you right away, just by following this taste test where you go really slow and you use your intuition the whole way through, but you just put a tiny bit of the plant, first you crush it and smell it, then you put a tiny bit onto your tongue, and you don't even chew it yet, you just wait. And you might wait 15 minutes or more. Then chew a little bit, but you don't swallow yet, and you wait and see if there's any sensation in the mouth. And then eventually, if everything feels okay, then you swallow a little bit and you wait before you have more. And that's a way to keep yourself safe as let's say you find plants you don't know and you feel attracted to them. That's a way to continue your learning.
Yes, engaging directly with the plant.
Mm-hmm, right.
And being careful at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Katrina, before we move on to a couple other questions I had, are there any other plants that you would like to talk about today?
All the wild grasses with their 8 amino acids as a survival food, it could save your asses.
That was my favorite rhyme, I have to say.
Yeah. So all the grasses, pretty much in general, are edible, and they're different stages of what that looks like. Of course, there's bamboo that's a grass, and so it has an edible food value too, but you have to catch the right stage. But usually, if you're living in a community, there's going to be some wild grasses that get green in the spring and maybe again in the fall. And what I love to do is go outside and watch the sunrise and then nibble on a little bit of the grass. And I'll just chew it, and every grass tastes a little bit different, but I'll chew it up and get the proteins, and then I'll spit out the pulp after I get all the juices out. And that's an incredible way to connect and get remineralized and get chlorophyll from the sun, and that detoxes and cleans out any excess toxins we don't need. It's amazing. Out of 108 minerals of the earth, grass has 98 of them.
Oh, wow. And these are, so the grass family is huge, right?
It's huge,
yes.
Right.
So this includes many, many plants.
Including the ones we're familiar with, like wheat or rye or barley, but even the ones we don't recognize or fully identify, just the wild grasses growing around us, even the lawns.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, those are edible as long as they're not sprayed.
Mm-hmm. So you can mow your lawn with your mouth. No.
Exactly. I go out there with my scissors and my blender, and I make grass juice, but I use a blender to do it. And I'll cut the grass into like half-inch pieces and then add water, blend it up, and strain it. And that's a really nice green juice.
That is so cool. When I was little, my little sister read Chicken Little, I think was the book. And in the book, one of the characters makes bread from wheat. And so she went out and collected all these wild grasses. And then my mom helped her and they made bread. And I remember
wow.
I know
That's
the
so
story,
wonderful.
it just came back to me. And I remember thinking, like, is this safe to eat? And we all just sat there eating it.
Yeah, all the wild grasses have edible seeds, just like wheat. So you can go out and gather the seeds of any of the grasses.
That's so cool. She was ahead of her time.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's so great. So grass definitely is something, and this includes wild oats and the
Right.
things that we see growing. Okay.
Yes.
And you would harvest not the roots. There's probably not much to the roots, but you would harvest
Not
the
as
plant.
much to the roots, but they're edible if you wanted to eat them.
And in the book, too, you talk about some really cool ways to use these plants. One that I really liked was the wild bath recipe. Can you share with our listeners what that is?
When you're making a green juice, a lot of times you might strain out the pulp. You don't have to. You can certainly just drink the pulp. But if you do strain out the pulp, that makes an amazing facial. And you can also make the juice and just pour it directly into your bath water. And I particularly love to do this with mallow because mallow really hydrates and supports skin health, and the chickweed. Those two are really good for the skin in particular. But I love to make a mallow facial because it turns into sort of this gelatinous, almost like aloe vera type goo. And you can, when you're in a bath, you can slather that on your body and just soak in it for, 15, 20 minutes and come out refreshed as well as hydrated, and the skin is renewed.
And so of the mallow, you're using the plant itself to do this?
I actually use the entire part, the roots, the stems, the leaves, everything.
Okay, good
Mallow
to know.
is magical because if you harvest, let's say you're growing a garden and there's some big mallow plants right where you want to plant your tomatoes. So you, instead of just weeding it and getting rid of it, you can harvest it. And I just like that different concept. Like everything that we pull out is so important that to harvest it instead of just get rid of it is much more empowering for everyone. So you harvest your mallow, the root and all, and you wash it up and then chop it up into pieces and put it in like a quart or a pint of water and let it sit for an hour or so. And then after that, you can open it up and it's turned into egg white consistency. And that gelatinous character is so good as the base of lotion or the base of shampoo, or you can drink it and it's so healing for any kind of congestion or cough. It just gently moves out those congestion from the body.
Is it safe to harvest plants that sometimes mallow has rust, that fungal?
Right.
Do you want to avoid those plants when you're making your medicine and your food? Probably, I would think.
Well, if you have the choice, go towards the plants that attract you the most, and that's just, but there's times when maybe it's late in the season. The mallow rust tends to come just sort of later in the season, or when when things aren't as optimal for the plant. But that may be the only mallow available is the mallow with the rust on it, and I still use it. It's not going to harm you. It's just, it has another character that I'm sure has effect. I don't know exactly what that effect is.
I know the microbes.
Yeah, it's subtle, my sense.
It makes it a frothy orange color? No,
no, I don't think so.
Hopefully not. And then another great way to use these plants was the green powder. If you could share with our listeners what that is.
Yeah, the green powder is really empowering. I think a lot of places we experience these winters, and even if we don't, there's still seasons, and plants come in their prime time and then they die back. So when a plant is in its prime time, any of these 13 wild plants, like let's say there's in the spring right now, there's tons of lamb's quarter and it hasn't gone to seed yet. And so it's at its great prime time to harvest it. And that just means like cutting above the roots and drying the young stems and leaves. And you can do that with dandelion, you can do that with mallow and any of the wild plants, drying it on screens, or you can do it in dehydrators. I generally don't recommend drying it in direct sunlight because the UV can break down some of the nutrients and chlorophyll. But once it's dry, brittle dry, then I take it and put it in the blender, a dry blender, and grind it up into powder. And this becomes a superfood mineral supplement for the winter. And then you can use it all winter long when there's no plants growing. Sometimes I'll add salt to it and make it into a wild mineral salt. But it's a great thing to add to smoothies or add into dishes.
I love that use of it because then you can have it year-round.
Exactly. And that keeps us connected to the wild abundance year-round.
In the book, too, you mentioned that the best, and this is kind of veering off on another topic, but I wanted to be sure to mention it. In the book, you write that the best permaculture teachers are the wild weeds and that they are living examples of some permaculture principles. Can you just briefly touch on that?
Yeah. One of the permaculture principles is multifunction. Whenever you do something, make sure that it has multi-uses so that it's benefiting a lot of different levels, not just one. And the weeds definitely do that. So here's a weed growing, and it's benefiting the pollinators because it's got the flowers with the nectar and the pollen. At benefiting the earth because it's breaking up compacted soil and aerating and encouraging the earthworms and microorganisms to re-inhabit the soil. And then the leaves pull up minerals and compost back down each year to create topsoil. And then it's benefiting humans as food and medicine. So those are just three simultaneous benefits that this one plant is offering.
So another benefit of these plants, besides the many benefits we've heard about today, the nutritional value, the food, the medicine, emotional allies, and all these ways that we can use them, how do these foods and these plants help contribute to food security?
Well, the exciting thing about food security is that they are our food security. If the stores don't show up with their foods, or if the weather changes enough to where crops don't grow, these wild plants are still going to grow because they can handle high elevation, low elevation, hot temperatures, cold, dry, wet. They're so adaptable. And if we know these plants, then we have our food and medicine. But what's interesting is that, so we can say that, but then there's another dimension, there's another level of, okay, but we also have to start ingesting them way more similar to wild animals. And that's my greatest teacher is, of course, nature. And when I look outside in nature, every other species on the earth eats all wild, local, and fresh living. They don't process the food much. They don't cook it. They don't transport it, package it. Maybe a little bit. Every animal probably does a little bit of processing, but pretty minimal. And in general, it's still enzymatically alive. If we really want to survive in harmony with nature, we have to start imitating nature more and more. And that means starting to eat them in their more fresh state. And when we do that, the potency of the plant comes so alive that we don't have to eat much, and therefore it's so sustainable. We don't over-harvest, and the plants keep reproducing. And so there's a whole other level of culture that as humans we're wanting to embrace to live more in harmony with the earth.
How important is the foraging aspect of this? So say, because I buy dandelion greens from the farmer's market. I might get my amaranth from the bulk bin at the health food store. Tell us how important the aspect is of going out and foraging and collecting your own plants.
Well, in the beginning, it's good to just start with where you are and then just take a few little steps. So it doesn't have to be all or nothing, but the more you can go out and make a direct connection with the earth and where that plant's growing and what's living on it or around it, that starts to create this reciprocal relationship with you and the whole cosmos, really, the whole ecosystem of your home. And there's something that is so nourishing and connecting about that experience, just getting outside and hearing the birds and touching the plant itself and harvesting it. So that's maybe that's 90% of the nutrition right there. And then, but you also know where it was growing, and you have this connection that sometimes when you buy things in the book, it's still useful and good, and sometimes that's the best we can do right now, and I commend that too. But if you can even integrate a little bit of the wild that you harvest directly into your daily diet, all the better. Just starts opening this doorway of being sort of guided.
Are there any drawbacks from collecting these plants in the wild? How do you know that a place hasn't been sprayed with herbicide? How can you be sure that the plants that you're getting are fairly safe?
Okay, so this is what's interesting is that we definitely have to be observant. The observational skills are number one. And when I'm out harvesting, I'll look and I'll notice what's my county's patterns, where do they spray every year, and I'll avoid those places if possible. But I'll also notice the plants directly, and if they're twisted or curling or discolored or they smell on some level, definitely don't go there. Find a different place to harvest. So, in general, let's choose the most optimal places to harvest. But then there's times when we may not have that opportunity. And I was in New York City last fall, and I was in Central Park, and I was harvesting dinner. I was just harvesting some things to make, some greens, some dandelions to make juice. And I realized, I know this is a very polluted place because there's cars 24 hours a day and, people, and it's just intense congestion in a certain area. So, however, I I noticed that these plants looked amazing. They were thriving in it. And that to me is a sign of like, well, I'm in the same polluted environment, and these plants have figured out how to thrive in there, so I want to eat them so that they'll teach me how to thrive here too. So they can help us be more adaptable to the specific environment. And then they also can help us detox. And I think, luckily right now I think we have more opportunities to find cleaner places to harvest, but there may come a point where, like, okay, there's not that much, like, if we're, whatever, there's a disaster or something that happens and our only options are plants that are grown in maybe compromised situations. There's like nature is always adapting and evolving. And so, for example, amaranth, there's one kind of amaranth that has become Roundup resistant all by itself. It's just evolved to become like, okay, you can spray Roundup on me and it's not going to affect me anymore. So the plant has adapted, and I think that it's like this edge of evolution that the plants are at. And that can teach us to be that flexible and adaptable too.
We need that plant because of all the Roundup.
Right. Right. It would help us become more Roundup resistant, I think.
I want to be Roundup resistant, Katrina.
Yeah. So there's a lot of depths that we could explore, and obviously everyone has to take their own journey and choose and be close to their intuition, what feels right. But there's a lot of open doors with that.
Yes, and you actually had a major impact in your nonprofit, Turtle Lake Refuge, and you can find it online, turtlelakerefuge.org. You, I think, really had a major impact in your community and with helping a park become herbicide-free or chemical-free.
Yeah, we started with one park. It was about 10 years ago, and we asked our city council and the Parks and Rec department if we could have one park, and we volunteered to put compost tea on it, and weed harvesting parties. We even put a bat box up so they wouldn't spray for mosquitoes. And then we asked the next year, could we have two? And they gave us another one. And then they said, that's enough. You people have a choice. That's enough. So, but out of 50 parks, I didn't agree that we all had a choice. Like the kids didn't have a choice, or the bees don't have a choice. So we wrote a city ordinance and got it on the ballot. At the same time, marijuana was on the ballot for Colorado, so we knew it was going to pass. But then the city was really concerned because it was pretty strict, so they asked us to work with them, and we ended up choosing to rewrite a resolution. It's called the Organically Managed Lands Resolution that got passed unanimously in Durango. And then the next year, over a third of the parks were converted to being managed organically.
That is fabulous.
So there's a long journey of educating and shifting. We're still on the path, but it's good. It's really good. Yeah.
And could you tell us just briefly a bit about your nonprofit and the things that you do are amazing. The work with the parks and the compost tea and the organic lawn care service. So it's basically, It's all about plants, right? Your nonprofit.
It is. It's all about caring for the earth. Our mission is to celebrate the connection between personal health and wild lands. And so all the different ways we can do those things, and there's a lot of ways you can do that, we focus on. So, yeah, we have a wild food cafe that we serve lunch every Tuesday and Friday. So if you come to Durango, you can come and have lunch on Turtle Tuesdays and Frog Fridays from 11:11 to 2:22. And then we have a program called Be Happy Lands, and that's where we help people from spraying. Basically, we'll go and manually harvest the plants. This is more, we'll do lawns, but we'll also do bigger tracts of land, like homeowners with large land. We manually go out and harvest the plants, the weeds, and then we'll sprinkle like a wildflower or native grass seed and amend the soil. And then we even apply a weed remedy to the land, which is basically just like encouraging the land not to continue to produce these plants by taking the ash, like basically the seed or the root, depending on how it propagates, and burning it into an ash and then diluting that ash. It's a biodynamic remedy technique that's used more in Europe. It's more common, but we're experimenting with it here, finding that's, we're just playing with it from different angles. How can we ultimately encourage people to have tolerance and see the value of these plants? But right now, the county still says these weeds are illegal It's funny because there's marijuana is legal here, but you can't have thistle growing on your property, or you'll get a fine.
And you had a good story in your book about someone that had thistles, I believe, growing, and then you made some juice, and he changed.
That's right.
Yeah.
He never sprayed again because he became part thistle.
Oh, I love that. So if people wanted to find out more about your nonprofit and your work, how can they reach you? Is it best to do it through the website?
Yeah, if you just go to turtlelakerefuge.org, you can send me an email, or you can see what classes we have available and get involved, or you can come through and volunteer. Anyway, there's lots of ways to participate.
I know, and you're teaching classes all over, and permaculture classes as well as plant and foraging classes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so if you had any advice for someone listening who wants to get started in meeting, greeting, and engaging with our wild ancestors, these wonderful plants, what are a couple steps that they can do? And we kind of talked about it, but just as a summary.
Yeah, as a review, right. Well, I would recommend going outside and identifying as many of these 13 plants that are growing right in their backyard. And that could be a treasure hunt. They might know some of them, and they might not know some of them, but perhaps they could start asking around or get connected to another plant guide type person and learning. I like to learn from the plants themselves, but books are also fantastic with pictures, and then people are really amazing. If somebody can bring you and introduce you to a plant, you make leaps and bounds so much quicker that way. But I would recommend is going out and just identifying the first, even if you only know one, like dandelion, going out and then picking some leaves, maybe taking a little taste right on the spot just so you introduce yourself, and then coming in and using it either in a juice or putting a little bit in your salad or an addition to your pasta or whatever meal you make, starting to bring it into your life on a daily basis.
And of your diet, of what you eat daily, how many wild plants? Are you eating them pretty much daily?
Yeah. I mean, I nibble on them as I pass them by, and then we also make food out of them all the time too. So we made for this 8-course meal, we made a dandelion pesto quiche and a wild Siberian elm leaf lemon bar. And we put mallow in the soup. We made a coconut curry mallow soup. And then we made a salad with 13 wild edible species of greens. Anyway, so yeah, they're integrated into our cafe and into my personal diet on a regular basis.
Into you, no?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And you do have recipes in the book.
Yes, lots of recipes.
Mm-hmm. And so the book, The Wild Wisdom of Weeds, 13 Essential Plants for Human Survival, where can people find this? On your website?
If they want to get it from our website, we'll send them a packet of the 13 seeds, the wild seeds. They get a free packet of seeds when they order it from us. But you can also get it at Chelsea Green, the publisher, and you can also get it from Amazon. So there's other places.
And I'd love to see your neighbors' faces when you're out there planting dandelions.
I know. Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. So is there anything else you'd like to add to share with our listeners today?
Well, I just am excited. I feel that the more of us that are wild food eaters, we become an incredible resource to each other. And I feel that is one of our greatest resources is ourselves as a collective whole, especially the more connected we are to our earth and our home. And that makes us even better caretakers. And collectively, I feel like we can do a lot by connecting in this way with each other and the earth through these wild plants and really celebrating what's here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
You've been listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. You can find us online at sustainableworldradio.com and also on iTunes. For more information about permaculture and ecology, visit the Sustainable World Media YouTube channel, where you'll find videos about permaculture, aquaponics, organic gardening, rainwater harvesting, and much, much more. Sustainable World Radio is a listener-supported program. If you like what we do, please consider making a donation to the show. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier, and thank you so much for listening. Our first documentary, The Soil Solution, is now available at sustainableworldmedia.com. The Soil Solution is a 28-minute documentary film that explores the potential that healthy soil may hold in reversing climate change.